I was in the Gulf earlier this weekend, and I caught up with Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal for an exclusive Sunday interview. He had just met with President Obama, and I asked him what he told the president he still needs to battle the spill.
We need more local decision-making authority. We asked for senior Coast Guard officials to be put in each coastal parish. The second thing we needed just simply more resources. I told the president, for us, it's trust but verify. You know, that old saying that we've heard promises, we want to see that happen on the ground. The third, and the area we spent the most time, was on our plan, the state's plan to build sand booms to keep this oil out of our wetlands. Now, we have said for weeks now, we'd much rather fight this oil on a sandy barrier island than fighting it inside our wetlands. We've got miles and miles of these islands that have been eroded by Katrina, by storms, and over time, we proposed a plan, 24 segments, to rebuild, to refortify these islands. After weeks, and if they'd approved this when we first asked, we could have built 10 miles. 10 miles of sand
The
booms.
president says that more is not always better, and the Army Corps of Engineers took the request seriously, evaluated it, decided it was okay for certain areas, but they didn't necessarily think immediately the plan that was suggested was the right plan. Is that not a fair response?
Yesterday, the Army Corps of Engineers approved 6 segments out of 24, over 40 miles out of 100. But here's where our concern was. The federal government only ordered BP to pay for to do one of those 6 segments. That's 2 miles out of 100. Our message to the president today was, make BP pay for this. The federal government shouldn't be making excuses for BP. This is their spill, their oil. They're the responsible party. Make them responsible.
Now, Admiral Allen, I asked him several days ago about why the boom that you've requested hasn't been getting here, certainly in the amount that you want. He said every state had a contingency plan for an oil spill, and they are following the contingency plans, and the bottom line is the states, including Louisiana, need more than their own contingency plans called for. If that's true, isn't it fair to say that Louisiana, in addition to the federal government, never really adequately prepared for this?
A couple of things. We looked at those plans and said, these plans aren't detailed enough for this spill, what's coming into our state. We kept asking the Coast Guard and the BP to update these plans for this specific spill. These are generic plans. We said, update this plan for this spill. They said, the oil still may not come to all of your coast. Yeah. We said, assume a worst case scenario. They told us it's not coming subsurface. They told us we're not going to see the heavy oil. They told us it would only be weathered oil. I'd say to those people, come to Pasalutra. Come to South Pass, go see the heavy oil, come to Cat Island, see the oil on the pelican's nest, come see the oil on the eggs, come see the oil on the birds, come to Grand Isle. There's 100 miles of Louisiana's coast that's been oil. So our bottom line is, again, we didn't expect all those resources a month ago, but we gave them a worst case scenario plan. We need more of those resources down here. Go back to last Friday. Terrebonne Parish is approved for, they submitted a plan for 180,000 feet of hard boom. Coast Guard approves them for 90,000 feet. A week ago Friday, they didn't even have 90,000 feet. They didn't have that much boom, hard boom in the parish, much less deployed.
Right. And what happens? The government just says, we just don't have it?
Well, in that case, they literally had hard boom sitting on the dock and they didn't deploy it. And
why didn't they deploy it?
There was no excuse. The BP contractor said, BP told them not to do it till the oil was coming. NOAA projections showed for days, and we saw the oil ourselves. We finally brought the Coast Guard captain that was in charge of Louisiana's response with us on a National Guard Black Hawk helicopter, showed him the oil on the island, showed him the sheen in the bay, showed him the oil coming into that area and said, this needs to be boomed. He agreed it needed to be boomed.
Before this crisis occurred, you were perhaps best known nationally as a critic of big government, as a critic of big spending, and here you are desperately asking for big government, big spending.
When government grows too big, it doesn't do its core functions properly. Absolutely, I believe in a limited government that is effective and competent at what it does. We need federal government exactly, we need our federal government exactly for this kind of crisis.
President Obama says everything that the government could do is being done. True or false?
Well, look, I've been very clear. I think there could have been a greater sense of urgency.
So false.
And you've heard federal officials say that as well. It's not just me, the governor of Louisiana, saying that. You've heard the captain of the Coast Guard, who was responsible for Louisiana's response, saying, yeah, he could have been doing more to push BP to get these more resources out more quickly. But we can continue to look back. I'm looking forward.
I just came from one of your beaches, Grand Isle Beach. It's usually pretty crowded on Memorial Day weekend.
10,000 people should be here this weekend. There's nobody on the beach, nobody in the marinas, but it's more than money. It's our way of life. People down here have been fishing down here for decades. They want their children, their grandchildren to be able to do that.
Do you think Louisiana is ever going to be the same?
Absolutely. We're in a war here to fight to protect our way of life. We absolutely will get it done. Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal joining me again. General Colin Powell. General, again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jake. Good to be here.
As a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what do you make of this push and pull between the federal government and the states?
When I was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, I have watched a number of these kinds of crises come and go. I've seen hurricanes, tornadoes, riots in Los Angeles, the tsunami. And in every instance, what I have sort of learned from all of these is that the national government, the federal government, the president has to get involved as quickly as possible. And if you don't, then public opinion starts to drag you, the media pushes you. And so when something like this clearly is going to get beyond the capacity of whoever caused it, get beyond the capacity of local authorities, I think the federal government has to move in quickly and move in with, to use my favorite expression, decisive force to demonstrate that it's doing everything that it can do.
And you didn't see that in this case?
I think the president correctly said the other day that he'd been monitoring it, following it, and essentially been on top of it from the beginning. But that impression was not conveyed to the American people, and the comprehensive speech he gave the other day, I think he would have been better served and the nation would have been better served if he'd given it a few weeks earlier. But I think the federal government now is fully engaged, and it's become more than a problem of just stopping an oil spill. It's an environmental problem, an economic problem, the welfare of the people in the Gulf region, and how do we get it all cleaned up, and how is it affecting people? So it's more than BP and a hole in the ocean floor. It is a major problem that can only be dealt with by the federal government and all the resources of the federal government, and that's what the president is now doing.
Some are calling for the military to take charge of the whole operation. In fact, Senator Bill Nelson of Florida said it should be put in the hands of a solid figure like a retired General Colin Powell. I assume you don't want that job, but do you think the military could do a better job than is being done right now?
It depends on what you want them to do. Military brings organization, it brings control, it brings assets. Whether it's the right combination of assets that you need right now, I don't know, but certainly I'm sure my colleagues in the Pentagon are looking at it. And what you want is somebody who is in the military now, not somebody who used to be in the military, somebody who is controlling troops now. What we would do in my time, we would assign it to one of our Army commanders. The Second Army would go in on Hurricane Andrew and take charge of things. But whether that's the right combination of assets now, I'll have to leave others to decide. You first got to figure out, what do we need? Do we need people to clean beaches? Do we need people to put out skimmers? We have lots of fishermen and others down there who are available, who want the work and know the water a lot better than an Army unit coming in. But whether it's Army, Coast Guard, local forces, it is time for a comprehensive, total attack on this problem to protect the shoreline, to protect the livestock, to protect the wetlands, but most of all, to give the people in that part of our country a sense of hope that this is going to be solved. Sooner or later, they will stop the leak. And after that comes the problem of cleaning up, and after that comes the problem of, okay, this safety system didn't work. What do we need in the future if another safety system doesn't work? What kind of standby capacity do we have to deal with this kind of problem if we are going to do more drilling offshore?
I want to move on to some of the other items in the news. Obviously, big news in the last few days with the House of Representatives voting to allow President Obama, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Secretary of Defense to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the ban on gays and lesbians serving openly in the military, if those three figures decide that it's appropriate. Here you are in 1993 testifying in favor of this ban.
The question is, do you believe that homosexuality is compatible or incompatible with military service?
Incompatible.
Incompatible.
Open homosexuality in a unit setting is incompatible.
It involves matters of privacy, human sexuality, that in our judgment, if allowed to exist in the force, would affect the cohesion and well-being of the force.
How do you feel today?
Things have changed. That was 17 years ago. And you'll notice that we were uniformed in our opinion. All of the chiefs were speaking, and sitting next to me was the Secretary of Defense, Les Aspin, who also felt the same way.
Democratic administration.
Democratic administration. And the compromise we came up with was don't ask, don't tell. There were worse options. There were worse options that were being considered at that time. Total ban. The compromise was, if you want to serve, keep your sexuality, the identification of your sexuality to yourself.
Where are we today?
And today we've changed. The country has changed. I think we are at a point now where the policy, which is not a policy, it's a law, should have been reviewed. It's been reviewed. And I have always believed, and I've said this many times recently, that you ultimately have to listen to the military authorities and what they think is good for the force and whether or not the force is prepared to handle this. I think that the position taken by Mr. Gates, Secretary Gates, and Admiral Mullen and the chiefs was a sound one. Let's study this. Let's accept that it's a decision. The president said we're going to do it. It's a decision. And the Congress has to pass the law to allow that. And so let's take the time to make the study, see what the implications are. Congress has decided recently, not a done deal yet because the Senate hasn't acted, that we should pass the law repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but not put it into effect until these studies have been made and the military has certified. But I think at the end of the day, the law will change and Don't Ask, Don't Tell will go away. But don't underestimate some of the issues that we dealt with in 1993 and that we're dealing with now. I think it would have been far more difficult to do it in 1993 than it is today with the open attitudes. But there are issues of same-sex marriage, there are issues of domestic partnerships, there are issues of billeting, and that's what this study is going to work its way through. Not to find a way to not accept the judgment of the President and the Congress, but how do we actually implement this in a way that strengthens the force. But I think it will happen, and I think the military leaders are speaking out on this, and they're not all uniformly of the same view, but they will execute this, and they'll execute it like they execute everything else they're given as a mission. They'll do it well.
Are you personally in favor of it?
I'm personally of the view now that attitudes have changed, and I think it is perfectly acceptable to get rid of the law and the policy, but I think before we actually do it, we have to hear clearly from the officers and men and women who are in charge of executing that policy. It's one thing to sit here in Washington, D.C. and say it's no problem, do away with it. I think it's important to listen to the troops who are affected and take into account the views of the senior leadership, military leadership of the armed forces.